Hello folks, Jason Chrisman, JC's Bees, your Central Ohio beekeeper. As promised last week, this week's video is going to be on your second year of beekeeping and tasks or things you should think about doing. But before we get into that, I would like to ask how many of you first year beekeepers after coming out of winter are starting over again your second year? In other words, how many of you first year beekeepers lost your bees over winter? Leave a comment down below. First thing I want to tell you is don't blame yourself. I went through this the first 3 years of my beekeeping career, I guess. And I understand exactly what you're going through. You feel like you let your bees down. You feel like maybe there's steps you should have taken to keep this from happening. But let me tell you, don't blame yourself. Learn from what has happened, make changes, and move forward. That's all you can do. There's a beekeeper over in the UK that I follow named Richard Knoll. Richard shares some great content, a lot of great beekeeping knowledge from Richard. And just recently, Richard shared a video where he lost a bunch of his hives. And Richard's been keeping bees for probably just as long as me, if not a little longer. So it's not the experience let his bees die. It's just one of the wild cards we as beekeepers have to deal with. There's a lot of variables in beekeeping, and we can only control so many of those. And once it gets out of those boundaries, it's out of our hands. So for you beekeepers that are starting over this year, keep your heads held high and like I said, learn from your mistakes and do what you can to correct those. I would also suggest that you, if you're buying bees, try and get them from your area. It doesn't make sense to have bees shipped to you from a different region when the climate might be different. And if you are going to do that, I suggest midsummer you requeen that colony. If you get another colony from another region, you requeen that colony with a local queen about midsummer. That way you've got a better chances of them overwintering. I've got a pet safe underground dog fence. And my dog's over here, he doesn't have his collar on, he's outside, and he's pushing the boundaries. So I'm trying to keep an eye on him while I'm recording this video. Okay, so some things you might think about your second year of beekeeping. First thing you want to do is you want to learn from all of your mistakes from the first year. And for a lot of us, those are just simple mistakes, like planning out when you're going to get into your hives. And when that date comes along, don't push it off. Take a few minutes and go do what you plan to do. It's so easy to say, well, this weekend I'm going to go out and inspect my hive and I don't know, throw on a pollen patty and see how the mite population's looking and so forth. And then say Thursday, Friday night, your buddy calls you and say, hey, Saturday, you want to go fishing? Yeah, fishing. Yeah, I'll go. And you just, you push the hives to the back and you don't do anything with them. It's very easy to do this, and you need to fix this in your lifestyle. If you set time aside for the bees, make sure you do what you intended to do. Another thing you might be thinking about as a second year beekeeper is this year I want to get a honey crop. Maybe your first year you did not get any surplus honey. And this is going to be your year, but you've got to be on ball to do this. When I say be on the ball, you need to, as soon as the weather permits, and here's my rule of thumb, when you start seeing the bees bringing in pollen into the hives, then start feeding pollen patties. And what that's going to do is on the rainy days, which here in Central Ohio, we'll get, like the maple trees will crack open and start to bud and produce pollen. And the bees will start collecting that pollen. And then we'll get 3, 4, maybe 5 days of rain. And during those 5 days of rain, the bees aren't able to get out and collect that pollen. So they'll resort to the pollen patty. I've had a lot of people in the past say, why are you feeding pollen once the maple trees start to produce? Isn't that kind of backwards? Shouldn't you be feeding it beforehand? No, because my thoughts are if you feed it too soon, like for instance, it's going to be in the almost 50 today and tomorrow. If I was to say, boy, spring's just around the corner, I seen the honeysuckle leaves starting to shoot out, so maybe I ought to get pollen patties on. And then in a week, we're back into the 20s. Yeah, I don't like them odds, because what happens is the bees start to brood up, and they're not going to leave that brood to recluster when it's cold, and therefore your bees die. So that's why I say mimic nature. Wait till you see the trees producing and the bees bringing it in, and then offer your pollen patties. And that's really going to boost the population in your colony in about 25 days. So something there you can do to boost your bee numbers so that when it comes time to getting your surplus honey, you've got plenty of foragers to go out and do that. So if you don't, say you neglect getting your pollen patties on and you neglect building up your colony, and then for me, about the end of May, black locust will bloom, and that's a really, really good bloom here in Central Ohio. But not all the time does the weather cooperate. A lot of times it'll rain during that bloom. But let's say the beginning of April, mid-April, I'm sticking in pollen patties into my hives. And what that's going to do is it's going to boost my hive numbers, or not my hive numbers, my bee population inside of my hives. And I'm going to have more foragers to go out and work that nectar flow come the end of May. So see, you got to plan accordingly. You want to build up a good month and a half before your flow starts. That way your hive is booming. Now, keep in mind, because we got first year beekeeping rules that will apply the rest of your beekeeping, I'm going to call it a career for lack of a better word. Varroa mites, hive beetles, two big pests, and they can really put a hurt into your bees before the honey crop even starts. So remember, you want to knock down your mite population early in the season too. Once you're feeding them pollen patties, you ought to be thinking about oxalic acid treatments or whatever treatment that you fall back on. But you're going to obviously have to wait for the weather to permit you to do your treatment, because not all treatments have the same specifications. So something to think about there. Second year beekeeping, another thing you're going to want to think about is your hive location. How well did your hive do where it is last year? Is it in too much shade? Should it have more sun? Something to think about. I know why it's cold and the bees aren't out flying. That's a real good time to relocate a hive. You see, when the bees are trapped in for a couple days, they'll have to make orientation flights when they come out regardless. So good time to move hives is when it's cold. You just don't want to break the boxes apart, and you're probably going to want a second person to help, so you can have one on the front, one on the back, lift the whole hive up and carry it where you need to. Now, I wouldn't jostle it around a whole lot. Try and be as gentle as you can, because remember, when it's cold, the bees are in cluster and they're all weaved between those frames, and it doesn't take much movement, and you can hurt the cluster, so, or the bees. Second year beekeeping, I don't really feel that queen rearing is set for your second year, but if you feel you're ready, yeah, I encourage you to go for it. But what I stand more behind in your second year is making splits. And that's where you take, a couple frames of brood, you stick them in another box with some young larvae, and they raise a queen, and poof, you've got another colony. So I recommend your second year, you at least try to make 1 or 2 walk-away splits. Now granted, walk-away splits don't have the highest success rate, so if you would rather, make you a split and buy a local queen. After they're queenless for a couple days or 24 hours, give them the new queen in a cage and then release her 24 hours later and see how that goes. See if you can start another colony from one of your existing, just as practice. Because we can all see by now that to stay in beekeeping long term, you need to be sustainable, which means you need to be able to make your own splits from the stock you have and keep growing your hive numbers. It's very common that people say, how many hives do you have? And a lot of us beekeepers will aim for a higher number because we don't count all of them, just because some of them are resources that, in case, let's say my bee yard over here to the side, let's say 20 hives die, and I've got another 20 hives somewhere else that I've split from this yard. Well, if these bees would die, I can go to the other bee yard, make splits from them, and get this yard going again. So it's very common that beekeepers aren't completely truthful with their hive numbers, because I know, like myself, I like to forget about a few of them. That way, in case I need to fall back on them, I have that option to do so. So once you get your splits made and get them going, you're going to want to treat them just like a brand new package. You're going to want to get them built up, pollen patties. You're going to want to watch the mites and the hive beetles and all of that good stuff. Every week on my Patreon page, which there's a link down below in the video description, when I release a new video, at the same time I also release a Q&A. And last week's question was, what kind of topics can you think of for a second year beekeeper? Or what kind of things would you suggest I point out? And or something to that effect. So what I have here is I printed out some of the answers from some of the followers, and I want to read them to you because there's a lot of good information just right here on this page that's going to help you as a second year beekeeper. And I'm going to start with Wesley Smith. Wesley points out some of the things that he learned in year one, and I think they're kind of important, and I want to share them with you right now. Things I learned year one. Number one, buy local stock or swarms captured. They were the very best producers and most healthy in climates where I live. Number two, don't mess with bees after dark. Yeah, that's a pretty good one there. Number three, if you have aggravated the hive, leave them alone, and definitely wear your veil if you have to go back around the hive later in the day. They have a collective memory of the clumsy inspection. Yeah, very true. Number four, just because the queens were sold to you as hygienic or mite resistant, inspect regularly and treat for varroa on a schedule. Number five, don't be sloppy with the honey or sugar near the hives in a dearth. I lost 2 hives to robbing late summer/fall and didn't know enough to recognize it. Yeah, I've done that. You go to pour the syrup from the 5-gallon bucket into the frame feeder, and when you know, it runs back the side of the bucket, drips on the ground right beside the hives, and before you know it, you've got a feeding frenzy. Number 6, in the spring when they are ramping up, give them space, and if they are making queen cells, go ahead and split them early. I tried to force a hive to stay put, and they just didn't listen to me at all. Ended up making them very angry, and they swarmed anyway. Year one was like a dance lesson to me, a person with 2 left feet. Year two was like trying to get into the swing of it and remembered the lessons from year one in time to not repeat them. Here's a really good tip, folks. Keep a calendar journal of your lessons learned and get ahead of them. This beekeeping venture hobby has been a wonderful case of letting nature keep me humble. Very, very true, Wesley. Very true. It seems that when we think we're on top of everything in beekeeping, yeah, Mother Nature and the bees let us know we're not. My friend Yuri, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce your last name. Yuri put, review all beekeeping myths out there. Yeah, this is true, and this is something I plan to do in my videos this year. I want to do some myth busting. Realize that losing a queen or a hive is not a total disaster. Make resource nukes just for such cases. Learn to assess your queen's performance, and don't be afraid to requeen. Start exploring making your own equipment. Start a log and schedule for each hive. Very good tips there, Yuri. My buddy Eric Austin. In my head, year two is where the fun starts. Making splits, equalizing hives, and building up your hives, trying to time the main flow with your hives peaking at the same time. See, that's something we just mentioned there. crushing the mite count early before the supers go on, and possibly playing around with starting a queen rearing system. This is my year 2 wish list, but I'm still looking forward to year 1 as well. So Eric's getting ready to start his beekeeping for the first year this year, but it sounds like he's already kind of got a leg up on some of his knowledge there, doesn't it? Edward Grosso, I guess that's how you say it. If I'm saying it wrong, Edward, I apologize. Edward put very timely, I've been reading many books and there is so much which becomes possible. My goal is to establish a sustainable apiary. So he's hitting on what I just discussed, making splits to be sustainable. And he'd like to get a little honey. I'd like to experiment with a lot of stuff depending upon timing. Using starter strips on frames, raise a few queens from cells, use a top bar, which he's hopefully going to have done in time to use this year. He's also would like to get a little bit more educated with when things bloom and how to monitor the flow. So some very good topics there and some very good points. As far as, I guess I didn't really hit on that. You know, year 2, that's where you're definitely going to work on your nectar flows and your different colored pollens. If you're not aware, I'm going to leave a link down below. There's actually a really handy bee pollen chart, and you can watch the color of pollen coming in on the bee's legs, go back to this chart, and it tells you what the bees are working. I'll link that down in the video description as well. You'll also want to check out, maybe do a Google search on your state and look for a blooming chart. I know Ohio has one. If you're in Ohio, I'll link that down below, and you can put in your zip code and it tells you when things are blooming. So yeah, that's another good thing to be thinking about. You know, it's not just about managing the bees and our hives and all of our hive equipment. We've also got to consider, you know, if the stuff wasn't in bloom, our hives wouldn't be thriving. So to time it all out is a good thing to do. Now back to the queen rearing. If you feel confident that you have the knowledge to start grafting or start practicing the OTS or whatever it may be, there's several different ways to queen rear. The NICOT system. If you feel you're ready for it, then go ahead, by all means, jump in there. But be prepared. There will be many mistakes, and you'll have to take and put the brakes on for a minute and learn from those mistakes to get where you want to be. It's just like everything else in beekeeping. You don't just hop in and get covered in honey. You've got to jump in and work hard to get covered in honey, or whatever it may be you're wanting to do with your bees. I know a lot of people have just a couple hives, and that's their main goal, is just to get a honey crop. They're not looking to sell queens or to sell nukes, and that's fine. So, you know, it is what it is, but use your own discretion on whether you feel you're ready to start queen rearing. I do think making the splits is a really good place to start. And you're also going to want to think about, maybe you had 5 colonies going into winter and a couple of them died. So now you've got a bunch of extra drawn frames. If you keep those drawn frames in boxes away from bees until, say, midsummer, wax moths are going to destroy them. So if you have extra comb, you're definitely going to want to either get that on your hives with bees in it, or you're going to want to make splits and use those frames up so that your splits can grow to cover all the frames. So yeah, that's protecting your resources is what that's called. Because you know how long it takes. It takes a little bit of time to get the bees encouraged to draw out a piece of foundation. So to take comb and just let the wax moths destroy it is going to set you back, because you're going to be starting with foundation or a starter strip. And you know, starter strip was mentioned here in this paper, and I think that's something everybody should experiment with too. If you used full sheets of foundation, try taking a piece of foundation, cutting it about 1 inch wide all the way across the top of a bar, putting it in there and sticking it in between 2 pieces of drawn comb. And watch how the bees will draw out natural comb all the way across the cell. And it also gives them the option of do they want worker comb or do they want drone comb. It's kind of interesting to see what they think they need. So anyway, folks, this is just some of the things. There is a whole list. You could go on for days and for hours. But to be honest with you, there is no step-by-step calendar on year 2, year 1, year 11 for me. There just isn't. Nothing works out perfectly on a day-by-day schedule. You have to go into your hives, you have to look them over, be very observant, and make changes from there. Sure, I'm here if you have any questions. You can go over to my Patreon page, shoot me a message, and usually I'm get back with you in a few hours, if not immediately. So, you know, I'm sorry there is no step-by-step on year 2, but basically you got to learn from your mistakes in year 1, move forward in year 2, and start trying some new things that you didn't try in year 1. That's about the lowdown on it, folks. So I hope this video has been helpful. I hope maybe it's got you thinking about things you weren't thinking about. If you have any comments, questions, leave them down below. If you enjoyed the video, throw me a great big, the biggest thumbs up they got down there. If you would, throw that to me, and that'll help boost the video and the YouTube search ranks and make it easier for other beekeepers to find. And hey, if you enjoyed this video, why not subscribe so you can see more of my content. Make sure you click on the little bell so you can get notified when I release new videos. And thanks for watching JC's Bees. We'll see you next Sunday, folks, 7 a.m. Thanks for watching.